most important elements for the end users or even integrators that are considering deployment of a digital signage system is to recognize that the digital signage world is not one of boxes. It is one that includes all elements, including networking, content, having the right people on the team, all of these elements. So I would focus on the digital signage ecosystem. Alan and Jonathan have done a really good job in their creating of a graphic associated with the digital signage ecosystem, where at the very apex of importance is, why are you doing your digital signage system at all? If you can't identify a return on investment or a return on experience or a return on objective, you can't identify those before you start, and they're not measurable, you probably shouldn't start, because you're not going to have, if you don't know where you want to end up, you're not going to get there. Second is, connectivity, to assume that, we've got wireless and that'll work just fine. Those type of assumptions will turn out to be, it doesn't have a great ending. The content element, everybody always underestimates content and the need to keep it pertinent, relative, and timely. So there's many other elements, including the easiest elements, which used to be very difficult, was choosing the right equipment. But in all candor, there are so many great manufacturers of flat panels and players, and that's really the easiest one. Choosing the right CMS. Again, 10, 15 years ago, it was a lot more vaporware, but today the content management software that is available, there's so many really, really great ones. The key is that they need to evaluate it based on their specific needs, because not all of the digital signage content management systems are created equal. There's numerous other elements of the ecosystem, but those would be the key elements that if you were going to consider investing in digital signage, both retail or corporate or transportation, government, military, even house of worship, is to consider all of the elements and don't consider digital signage as just a box. The biggest challenges for the digital signage industry is bigger than that small focus of the digital signage. It is technology in general, and it is this: the just good enough mentality. The idea that people have got to, in many, many organizations, is that, that's just good enough. That will work, and they won't take time to listen to the value proposition, that they need to consider the whole picture, and oftentimes they'll jump into a choice of a CMS or jump into the choice of a flat panel, a player, even a network strategy, and they have in their mind that's just good enough, and it will cause it to have less than the desired outcome. I mean, you want to make every dollar that you invest pay off, to have something measurable, and that just good enough mentality. Now, how do we overcome it? Well, it's focusing on questions. It's doing something similar to say, would you consider emergency notification important? Well, everybody would say yes. That would, varying different degrees depending on application, but emergency. Point is, by asking questions that are deeper than skin deep, you can establish a focus in your conversation and a focus of value rather than just good enough because they'd never thought of it. Because not all digital signage systems handle emergency notifications well. So again, to summarize, the biggest challenge is this just good enough mentality. It is, and people have got to the point to where they just flippantly accept something that looks like it'll probably work, and they'll want to move on, and that really can cause big problems down the road. What are the top 3 challenges that happen relative to the implementation of a digital signage network or system. Let's first look at it from the standpoint of the end user. The end user will oftentimes have expectations that do not match the outcomes. They don't allow for enough time, and they don't put their arms around the content that should be in place and a strategy. They don't focus past the top level often of, I need to get me some screens, I need to get me some players, and I need to get some software that makes it happen. But in reality, they underestimate how long it will take. They underestimate the commitment to developing content that is relative pertinent and that will be engaging or immersive. So that, and they oftentimes forget to really look at their network structure, because connectivity is oftentimes the Achilles of these digital signage systems. Now, answering the question from a perspective of an integrator, 20 plus years at doing the integration on the digital signage side, I would suggest to you that at the top of the list is an integrator must be committed to doing a demonstration of the content management software so that the customer has a realistic expectation of what it's going to take to maintain content. Do they have a person that is going to, persons that are going to be capable of engaging that software like it needs to be? From the integrator standpoint, it is not involving IT as quickly as possible, not getting them engaged, because while there's not as much attitude like there was 10 years ago, where the very first answer from many, not all, but from many IT professionals was not on my network, not on my network. They had this perception that digital signage was going to be this big security exposure. But involving IT as quickly as possible and engaging them through the same process, and being able to focus on their language. So an integrator needs to not only know the language of AV, but they need to know the language of IT as well. And that last one would be that integrator is not helping their end user at all by not dropping or stepping back and saying, why do you want to do this at all? Because if we can't identify the why, the return that you expect to get, then I would encourage you not to engage at all till you can identify that. So those are big ones. I mean, there's all sorts of other smaller ones, like having a very well-written scope of work, like encouraging your end user to have an written understanding documents about who has the authorization to put content on your digital signage system, and what type of content is appropriate for your digital signage system. So all of those things, there's not just one. That's why this is not traditional AV. A real important matter of focus should be the possible impact of security by embracing digital signage on somebody's network. The reality is that we have to play in the sandbox with the IT professional for distribution of the content. We're past the days of SneakerNet, where we take SD cards and we drive our car to the next screen and we plug in the new SD card, a USB drive, and that's the direction, and that never gets on the network, so they never had a concern. But now everything's going through a network, whether it be cellular, whether it be wireless, or whether it be wired. And the aspect is that, especially if the players are Windows-based, that with all the challenges that have occurred over the year with people that have backdoored the operating system to be able to do things, it's a major concern to the network people to make sure that they don't have exposure, which is why that there are more and more Linux Android-based platforms that people will engage in because you're not having to be concerned. That's not to suggest that Windows players don't have their position, but here's the real key. You need to make sure by conversation directly with the IT person that what you're putting on their network is going to work in their domain. Mm-hmm. And their domain has a set of rules. Sure. And you've got to make sure that your system plays nice in their rules. Now, the conversation between server and players on most of today's systems are encrypted, so it's not like somebody could capture a stream and rename it real easily and send it back out there. And yes, there have been just a very small number of systems compromised, but it's not the horror story that was painted several years ago, like everybody's going to have inappropriate content appearing in the middle of a grand, some grand transportation center or school system. Not that way at all. But the reality is it cannot be overlooked. So my suggestion is you talk it over with the IT team that you are working with. In the next hour, I can describe to you from A to Z a typical digital signage process. Now, one of the things I want to point out, it is not restricted to AV. It cannot just be digital signage and AV process. It's got to be digital signage, AV, and IT. Because without both players at the table and the ability to speak the language of both, it will end up being, well, we're speaking at the end of this tomorrow afternoon on the subject matter of scoring from the red zone. Many of the many digital signage projects never make it out of pilot because they did not engage all of the right team players. But the process is that whether brought in by the manufacturer, one of the CMS companies, or possibly a flat panel, even projectors now play a large role in the future of digital signage with their laser engines that you don't have to replace bulbs and stuff. But point is, we've got all sorts of ways that people find a path to an integrator. Now, I will just chase a rabbit over here to the right-hand side, is that the most common person sitting in one of my seminars is not an AV integrator. It is an IT person inside of a large company that the CEO or some executive team member tapped them on the shoulder, said, that digital signage stuff can't be that hard, you go do it. And they become the AV integrator, and hence it starts. Not a real pleasant, and so they sit in my classes and they're going, what did I do wrong? Or how did we get here from there? We've been at it for 2 years, we've spent X number of dollars, and our digital signage system is still not working. So the AV IT professional integrator doing digital signage, they start off with having that conversation with the prospective investor, customer, of asking what are the key business elements or returns that you expect, and helping them to set metrics. And then the process of helping them to identify the type of content, the type of environment relative to network, the type of realistic timelines. But it's the whole process of engaging in conversation and questions, rather than just saying, hey, I'm going to sell you the best mousetrap that you could ever buy for digital signage, because an integrator is agnostic towards hardware and software, meaning that I don't walk in there with my badge saying I am a blankety blank salesperson for this, that, and there. I walk in there ears first, questions from seasoned experiences, and I'm asking them, what do you want to get out of this? What type of content is going to be the most? Do you have an understanding statement? If you don't, let me help you put one together. Let's develop a scope of work so that we know where we want to finish up before we ever spend the first dime. Then we ask, if we didn't get that asked before we had that first meeting, then we ask for a meeting with IT. We say, we know this is going to sit on your network, so let's be friends. Let's be transparent. Let's talk this out. I need to know any gotchas that are coming my way from the standpoint of perspective. And then you start the process of and it's usually done in most of the integrator companies, with a salesperson conferring with an engineer that has technical talents and insight relative to digital signage. And we sit down oftentimes also with an installation integration expert like a tech, and we talk about, okay, we're going to do this in a large gym, and it's going to be a large video wall. Well, okay, we first got to talk about the content, we got to talk about the structure, getting it up there, we got to talk about the electrical impacts, about how do we communicate with the electrician or help them out. The whole point is, digital signage is not me selling somebody a box that has some software on it with a flat panel and I go to the next one, because that will just end up being static noise in the future of their environment. Not a good experience. So we go from the discussion of why, to the discussion with IT, to the discussion of internal team coming up with the correct elements. Then this is a step that's often missed, both by end user and by integrator, and that is somebody will say, okay, you're going to use this digital signage software to create these zones, and you're going to be able to have HR have this zone, and you're going to be able to have other people have these zones, and they're going to have approvals, and you're going to be able to submit, and you're going to have day parting, and there's the person, because they would be embarrassed to ask the question, because some of the words you're using is over their head, an absolute no-no, but is over their head. They're sitting there nodding, yes, 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 and they don't have a clue. And the end result is, they get into the digital signage, they get to their first day of training, they have 3 scared people sitting there getting ready to be trained, and then it hits. Wow, there's more to this than I thought. Maybe I don't have the right person, and that content that I said that I had already, well, I really thought it'd be easier for us just create it on the fly. And you're telling me that I maybe need to get a professional to create a color palette that is consistent across all of my screens, or that my messaging is consistent, that the right people are approving it. Point being, next step, after identified possible solution, is to sit down with a customer and actually do a demonstration of the content management software and see if they really understand. And then from that point, you develop a proposal. Now, up front, when I've talked about the return on investment, I've been very open about broad, bigger numbers about the budget, because I said, you know, if I told you that this system costs $500,000, would that be okay? And of course, if we're talking a small system, they fall back, well, you know, maybe a colorful metaphor mixed in there, but no, that's not okay. Then I said, well, then let me reflect to you that this is going to be more than $5, and it's going to be a healthy investment for doing it right. I said, and so I've talked about budget beforehand, but now, past the demonstration, it's now ready for the proposal, and if they accept it, then the next process is to go through the checklist again before you ever start implementation, before you do anything with their money, is to make sure that their network's in place, make sure that they've got fresh content ready to go, make sure that the logistics of installation, if it's a retail store, often integrators forget, you know, your average installation is midnight till 6 a.m. in the morning. Did you count on that relative to your installation? Did you count on the fact that you're going to have to pay for security to be with you the entire time? Sometimes a big gotcha that nobody ever thinks about. So we go through the process of double checking that all of the dots are crossed, or all the dots are connected, and then we get to the implementation stage. And that implementation stage is with the careful hands of a project manager who keeps the touch of everything going on. And then you follow it all the way to the end, and then you set up, and you've already done this in your scope of work, but then you implement the element that most digital signage systems don't have. and that is an ongoing service and support plan. Oftentimes, digital signage it's not just a simple 55-inch in a landscape mounted on the wall. If that was all that it ever was, then the manufacturers for many of these things have a warranty that would cover coming to a place. But that's never it. It's a flat panel, a video wall that's 30 feet off the ground, and the manufacturer does not cover that type of stuff. Or let's speak at it from the content standpoint. The average customer has no idea about the need to back up, just like any other critical system, the content that has been created, have more than one place that the content provides, the cloud concept. But the point is, digital signage is a living organism. It's a project that requires constant focus and a focus on getting the content right and pertinent relative all the time. The last thing that we do is we come back 1 year after we've implemented it. A good integrator does this, and they'll say to the customer, okay, where are we? Is this working the way that you expected? And the answer is almost always, well, there's some good and there's some not so good. Let's not be like everybody else and just ignore that. Let's find out what it is that we need to change, because this is a living thing. If that screen right there is not getting any attention, it's got no stickability, nobody's ever using the content off of that. Let's step back and say, is it the presentation platform? Is it the content? Is it that you're not addressing dwell time, that you're creating messages that are 2 minutes long and your average dwell time is 15 seconds? So nobody's going to stop. It's a busy world. So I know that was a very long answer, but it's not a simple answer to ask what is it, the process from A to Z, because we've got an entire process written out, and we make sure that we check the list all the time. But the key is, most stop at the sign off of the first system after they've been trained. They don't follow up with a service program, and they don't follow up with a 1-year checkoff to see if they could make it better. I really appreciate the investment that these companies make in their booths showing off the technology, but it's the people that make a difference. And I come to these shows to further my strategic circle of points of information, points of knowledge, people that when I run up against this, I remember Ted at DSE, talk to him, okay, and then I have to go through the struggle of, where's his business card? But the point is, I come to DSE as a matter of building a network of knowledge through the people that I meet.